The maps for the homeland nations themselves are much better with this one, though. And they even got the flags right. However, they still forgot that Alsace-Lotharingen is part of Germany, not France. The border with Poland-Lithuania is crudely drawn at best, and the map showing Imperial Germany for some reason features the interwar period European borders. I could understand if they wanted to show where Poland, Lithuania, and the United Baltic Duchy and so on were within the Russian Empire, and I did that same thing when I drew up this map. I'm gesturing to nothing right now, but I'll add that in later. I don't know if I'm gesturing to the right area, but anyway.
It'll be somewhere on the screen.
It'll be somewhere.
You'll see it.
But adding the interwar borders in those artificial nations of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia just muddles things unnecessarily. The map featuring the Russian Empire has similarly confusing anachronistic surroundings, and they forgot that Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan were part of it as well.
Yep. However, we can compliment the sketch for talking about the telegrams these monarchs sent to try and avert war, even if it was only mentioned in passing.
I love the military assault and diplomacy, I would be the best. We sent telegrams, hoped to stop the bombs, but they weren't worth the paper they were written on. I called England Mad March Hell. You didn't help avert war there.
However, it must be said that these monarchs, as well as others, did far more to try to avert war than is mentioned here. The Kaiser always admired Britain and earnestly desired to secure her friendship, which was only natural since he was half English after all.
Oh, cool.
But his offers of alliance were always snubbed, simply because Germany happened to be the most powerful country on the continent, and Britain was still making it an official policy to make an enemy out of such a power, even though German ambitions neither conflicted with nor threatened British imperial interests whatsoever. For more on that, you can read one of the articles I'll link in the description. But getting back to... yes. Kaiser Wilhelm also offered his cousin, Nicholas II, a lifeline.
Also known as Nicky, in passing.
He also offered him a lifeline when he essentially wrote to the Tsar offering to create an alliance between Russia and Germany, similar to the one that existed during the reign of their respective fathers.
Due to the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck.
Indeed, such an alliance would have served the multi-purpose role of mending fences with Germany, shoring up the Tsar's position in the aftermath of the Annus Horribilis of 1905, given Russia breathing space to rebuild its economy and armed forces, and an opportunity to break with Republican France, which, aside from mutual hostility with Germany, had nothing in common with Russia, and was in fact a natural enemy whose revolutionary ideology was totally opposed to the Russian imperial system, and served as a safe haven to the Tsar's enemies. But alas, after signing the Treaty of Yorko, Nicholas II was persuaded by his ministers to change his mind, thereby making the treaty stillborn, which only served to humiliate the Kaiser, who would have made a much better ally than Republican France, while inadvertently weakening the Russian monarchy further by cementing a more powerful neighbor as an enemy on their nation's western doorstep when war broke out.
This is an extremely complex case, as Russia actually tried very hard to prevent the escalation of the crisis. It was always comparatively honest about our actions and motivations, and yet in the end, it was Russia that turned what would have been a localized Balkan conflict into a European and thus world war. Probably too much has been made about Russian support for Serbia as a factor in the start of World War I. It is true that Russia was eager to reassert herself as a major power. Russia had been humbled militarily by the Empire of Japan, being humbled diplomatically by the Empire of Austria-Hungary over the annexation of Bosnia. However, the Russians were under no illusions as to what war with Austria and Germany would mean, and it was Russia, while armed-bound to stand as the defender of the Orthodox Slavs, which urged Serbia to accept the Austrian ultimatum, and it was this urging by Russia, probably more than anything else, that influenced Serbia to agree to most, in fact technically all but one, demand, and that was to allow Austria-Hungarian police to come in and have powers to prosecute however they wished.
Here again we also see that it was the monarch, Emperor Nicholas II, who was least enthusiastic about going to war. He first ordered a partial mobilization against Austria-Hungary, only to be met with hysterics from his officials, at which point he reluctantly agreed to a general mobilization. It is true that Kaiser Wilhelm II encouraged his Austrian ally, Emperor Franz Joseph, to take a hard line against Serbia, with Austrian outrage certainly understandable. However, when Serbia surprisingly agreed to nearly all of the Austrian demands, and faced with the prospect of a continent set ablaze by war, His Majesty the Kaiser quite sensibly asked Franz Joseph to accept Serbia's concessions. However, Wilhelm's government and generals worked to sabotage their emperor's efforts by obstructing the message and watering it down to the point that it didn't make any sense. And when it finally did arrive, it was already too late, as Austria had already attacked. Likewise, even the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph was reluctant to give the order to invade Serbia, but was effectively bypassed by his own ministers, who downplayed the seriousness of the crisis until it was too late, and he only agreed to sign the declaration of war after he was told, falsely, by his foreign minister that Serbia had already attacked them. And of course, at the last minute, the Kaiser tried to avert a larger war by seizing on the possibility of Franco-British neutrality and ordering his forces to abandon the western offensive and shift to the east. His top general, Moltke the Younger, simply defied him and said this was not possible. In fact, it was possible, and the German plan called for all forces to be moved east after France was defeated anyway. And after the war, the supervisor of the German railroad network wrote an entire book explaining just how it was completely possible for Germany to have called off the attack on France and Belgium and concentrated solely on Russia. Getting back to the sketch, I would however like to compliment them for mentioning things rarely talked about. Like, for example, Kaiser Wilhelm's a condition he had due to his traumatic birth, which also left him deaf in his left ear and unbalanced because of that. His parents were rather unimpressed with him from the start, and would remain so, and from an early age his upbringing was supervised by Prince Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck, who was also a prince, and
the Iron Chancellor,
and his grandfather, Kaiser Wilhelm I, who distrusted the liberal tendencies of his parents. Due to his parents' embarrassment towards his infirmaries, which were at odds with the traditional Prussian view that their leaders were filled with strong martial vigor, the future Kaiser grew up with a complex, and felt compelled to overcompensate for his frailties by acting with his trademark exaggerated swagger in public, a swagger which gave rise to his later reputation as a saber-rattling bombast with an knack for rubbing people the wrong way.
Sounds slightly similar.
To who, me or you?
You.
Is that so?
Saber, rattling, bombast.
Oh, I get it. Very droll.
Right, you always rattle your saber at the beginning and end of every one of these videos.
No, I meant that sincerely. I wasn't being sarcastic.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm of a very rare group of people that use the term droll unironically.
That is rare.
Yes.
Yeah, he never fought an actual war during his reign until 1914. He then was very hesitant about taking action. He liked seeing his army parade, dressing up in uniforms and going on maneuvers. The last thing he wanted was to risk his army, his nice clean army, in actual combat. He was even more protective of his navy. Makes sense, considering the British Navy at the time was literally the biggest in the world and had been for like 2-3 centuries.
And the thing is, Kaiser Wilhelm had been building up his navy, but even it and France's combined were still not even close to the size of the British Navy at the time.
Yeah, the British Navy was big, to say the least. I mean, they, like I said, what do they have to control? Australia and New Zealand, India, 1 or 2 ports in China, other areas in Southeast Asia, I don't know where, Egypt,
Canada,
South Africa,
British Honduras, British Guiana,
parts of
Rhodesia, Nigeria, Kenya, India,
parts of the Caribbean,
yes,
other parts of Africa we cannot remember. I mean,
and
the amount of territory they had to protect was...
And all of it needed to be accessed by the sea. And when you add that to the fact that they're an island nation to begin with, you understand
and therefore needed constant transfusions of resources to survive, as shown by why Germany tried to sub them basically to death in the First and Second World War.
You therefore understand the importance to them of having an enormous and well-equipped navy. On the subject of war, the sketch actually makes a point of this.
I was in charge of German troops, but you proved to be hopeless oops. The commanders they ignored in the frightful First World War.
pointing out how his commanders largely ignored him, as I mentioned previously. During the war, he was reduced to settling disputes between generals, and finally to almost purely figurehead status, as the team of Hindenburg and Ludendorff came to dominate and could have their way on almost anything by threatening to resign. His advice and warnings were often ignored, and the truly ironic part is that had his leadership over the Imperial German military been as absolute as the Allies later portrayed it when attempting to pin the war on him, there actually might never have been a war at all. Or, had it happened, it would have been far less tragic than it ended up being.
Lastly, the sketch's final point is as poignant as it is true.
All this frightful war could do was set up World War II.
That World War II, in Europe at least, was a direct result of World War I, no one can deny.
In fact, many people literally just consider it a continuation of the first. It was just a small
Barely
whole
20-year period.
Yep.
And it was specifically the loss of the monarchies of Germany and Austria-Hungary that was responsible. Now I will explain why. With the economic tumult that Germany went through, it is possible that Hitler could have still managed to have become a significant political figure.
He did
Not as likely, but possible.
He did have a way of speaking that did
He had a
drive
public
people.
speaking ability.
Oh,
Yes,
a massive
that's-
one apparently.
Mhm.
Apparently it was really, really good. Bad for everyone else, but really good for
At
him.
public speeches, he was very good at it. However, there is simply no way that someone like him could have come to power and maintained himself in power if Kaiser Wilhelm II had still been on the German and Prussian thrones.
Assuming the Kaiser was strong. If the Kaiser was weak and basically vacillating like he was in the First World War,
No,
who
even,
knows what could have
even if that
happened.
it could have, even if he was like that, still wouldn't have. And here's why. Under the Constitution of the German Empire, the Chancellor was not elected by anyone, but appointed by the Kaiser.
fair
Remember,
enough.
Hitler was elected.
Fair enough, you're correct. My bad.
Before the First World War, only one Chancellor was appointed who was not a prince or aristocrat, and the idea that an Austrian commoner with no higher education and no record of any sort of success behind him at all could have been appointed by the Kaiser is simply beyond belief. And of course, even if he had been, he could have been dismissed at any time. There is simply no way Hitler could have become dictator of Germany if the monarchy had been retained after the First World War.
Less clear-cutting is World War II in Asia, but evidence points to the answer being the same. Much of the motivation for Japanese involvement on the Asian mainland was, after all, the result of the expansion of the Soviet Union, with Soviet-backed communists taking control of Mongolia and supporting a growing subversive element in the Republic of China. Wearing out for these communist threats always came about as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Not a good thing in my opinion. There may have been no need for Japanese intervention in China. Although the Japanese did want to invade and conquer and take over land either way, so...
Well, not really. They first of all, they didn't even invade China. They invaded Manchuria.
Chinese controlled territory at the time.
Nope. That's like saying Ireland is part of the United States.
Well, okay, technically you are correct, but there were close ties of a sort between Manchuria, or as they later called it, the Empire of Manchukuo. And
Manchukuo is actually just a word for Manchuria.
well, I don't know what the actual thing is, and that's...
I'm not sure we're pronouncing it right, but that's how
Well,
it
I've heard of
sounds when it's
Manchukuo, so I call it Manchukuo. If I'm wrong, my bad. Similarly, for the Weiger War, it all started because of the provocations of the Roosevelt administration aimed at forcing Japan to take aggressive action, which would turn public opinion in favor of American intervention in World War II, specifically in Europe. If there had been no war in Europe, there likely would have been no application of American pressure against Japan, leading to war. There would have also not been the antagonism between Japan and the Western Allies that grew as a result of the Japanese delegates to Versailles being ignored, and the later naval arms reduction agreements, which treated Japan as a second-class power to bring in America.
But to stay on course, this is about the results of monarchies falling, not the war itself. Looking at the Middle East, there is no case more simple to illustrate the effects of World War I, since so little has changed since then. World War II not touching too much on the region.
I mean,
In
the closest
Egypt,
it got
closest it got was Egypt.
Yeah, the closest it got was Egypt. And even then, it wasn't exactly that close to the Nile.
Exactly.
It was like just Angria, I think. And that's like
Fair
between
distance away
50, 100 miles to the west of it.
Prior to the Great War, there was not so much a Middle East at all, as it was almost entirely the Ottoman Empire. If there had been no Great War, if the Ottoman Empire had not collapsed, there would have been no Six-Day War, no Yom Kippur War, no Intifadas, no Iran-Iraq War, possibly no Iranian Revolution either, and with no Saddam Hussein, there's no Gulf War, no Second Gulf War, no Ba'athist dictatorship in Syria, no Syrian Civil War, no Lebanese Civil War, and perhaps no rise of radical Islam. The ISIS terrorists...
Radical Islam...
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
The ISIS terrorists causing so much trouble today would have no reason to exist, as their caliphate would still be standing in the form of the Ottoman Empire. Of course, saying that, it must also be pointed out that at the time of the Great War, the caliphate was not foremost on the minds of the Arab Muslims at that time. It is rather ironic to see these gangs and armies of Arab Muslims today fighting for an Islamic caliphate when, during the First World War, it was the Arab Muslims who fought alongside the Christian powers like Britain and France to bring down the Ottoman Empire and thus ultimately the last caliph of Islam, who was the Ottoman Sultan.
I will say one thing. The most holy Christian king of Europe, Louis XIV, made alliances with the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm just going to say that.
No, I get that. I get what you're saying there. But the thing I'm pointing at is
against the Catholic. Against the Catholic-backed, basically, Habsburgs. So...
You mean the War of Spanish Succession?
I think that was the one. I mean, Louis XIV reigned for like a horse.
But I'm talking about how the very same Arab Muslims who today are clamoring for a caliphate were the very same Arab Muslims, people-wise, who brought down the last caliphate. Ironic, isn't it?
Oh, I'm not saying that. I just wanted to bring up something else historic that it does, in a way, tie into this.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I do. I bring other historical information. I'm an amateur historian. That's what I like to do. And you guys get more information, so hey.
Yes, we both got more information from each other, actually.
Yeah, so this is actually good. For Europe, setting aside World War II, there is no doubt that the most ugly and horrific tragedies to befall the continent have been a direct result of World War I, and in many cases, the dissolution of the dual empire of Austria-Hungary. There were tensions, of course, that would have existed in any case, but changes were coming. Whether when Archduke Franz Ferdinand came to the throne or when Charles I received the crown. Both favored some changes, whether to unite the Slavic peoples into a third constituent kingdom, or to federalize the whole empire. In any event, much of the anger would have been dissipated, and for what remained, there was the combined strength of the others under the imperial crown to prevent it from becoming problematic. There may still have been some conflict between the Habsburg Empire and Serbia, but perhaps after shedding some other smaller minorities in their territory who would lend their support, the Slavs would become united as part of the Habsburg Empire. Who knows? In any event, had Austria-Hungary not been dissolved, there would have been no Croatian and Slovenian wars, no Bosnian War, and no ethnic cleansing, such as was seen in the traumatic breakup of Yugoslavia. Ouch!
World War I was not necessary, and it certainly wasn't about freedom, nor did it make any country freer. If World War I had never happened, the world would be a much better place. And even if it had happened, at least to some extent, people all over the globe would have been spared considerable suffering if the monarchs of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Russia had not lost their thrones in the process. Not a single monarch, it should be remembered, wanted war, and yet, thanks to the politicians that surrounded them all, that is what the world got. Thus, rather than being an example against monarchy, I think the whole sorry affair of the run-up to World War I is an abject lesson of just why it is monarchs rather than politicians who should be entrusted with foreign policy.
Competent monarchs, at least.
That's the thing, no.
Dumb monarchs, incompetent monarchs, stupid monarchs.
The thing is...
they'll probably make the same amount of decisions, and they might even screw up more because they have more power to do so.
This is a common myth. Monarchies are dangerous. What if the monarch is incompetent? The fact is, the same question could be asked about Republican leaders. However, rest assured, monarchs who are not capable of fulfilling their duties can be replaced, and have been throughout history. Take two of the oldest and most stable monarchies. In Great Britain, when King George III became incapacitated, the Prince of Wales was made regent and exercised his duties for him. Similarly, in Japan, when the Taisho Emperor was no longer able to fulfill his duties, the Crown Prince took over these duties for him as regent.
How long did the emperor survive afterwards?
I forget exactly how many years.
No. How long did they survive afterwards?
Oh, no, they didn't kill him. They have much more respect for their elders than that.
Respect for elders, I will give them that. Yeah, they have a lot of respect for the elders.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, even in the most successful republic in the world, the United States, only 2 presidents have ever been impeached, and neither one was actually removed from office. History has shown time and time again that by acting as fathers or mothers to their people, sovereigns are far less likely to wage wars of aggression than politicians, who do so largely for selfish reasons like personal gain or to settle scores. In contrast, a sovereign, as I've said before, by virtue of being the patriarch of their people, are far less likely to risk the lives of their people, and as a result, set the bar much higher when going to war. Consequently, if the decision to go to war had been left solely at the discretion of George V, Wilhelm II, Franz Joseph, and Nicholas II, and their wishes adhered to by their political and military servants, then war would either not have happened, or at the very least been greatly reduced in both its scope and severity, as would its ensuing consequences, namely, the weakening of Europe, the rise of fascism and communism, World War II, the League of Nations and its successor the United Nations, the emergence of the United States as the dominant world power, the Cold War, the European Union, and the fall of monarchies around the world especially, a price that was certainly not worth paying.